Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with Scott Moon and Chuck Manley. Today, we have two guests for you, and it's going to be a great conversation. We have Charles and Vlas Parapandies, like the Wheaties?
Rhymes with Wheaties. Come on, man.
Rhymes with Wheaties, dudes. Come on.
Take it.
Yes. That's not actually my specialty, is pronunciation. They're the writers and creators of the 2011 movie Immortals and the 2017 movie Death Note for Netflix, along with several other accolades where they are producers and writers and actors on both. And today we're going to be primarily talking about their new collaboration for Netflix, which is Gods and Heroes, which is an animated series coming in this year. It said 2020, but has it been pushed back at all?
No, we're actually still. I mean, thankfully, animation is corona proof, and we'll be out probably in November of this year. So,
awesome.
Yeah, no, still on track.
Very clever.
Fantastic. It looks great. I like the all the artwork that I've seen online makes it look fantastic. I like that style, and I like that it's an adult cartoon, right? Like
people are gonna. We think they'll be. I mean, Austin has done a great job. Dongwoo Studios, who's done the animation in South Korea, they've done an amazing job. Our first 4 episodes are done and locked. We're halfway home. It'll be an 8-episode season, and we can't say enough about the people at Powerhouse. From top to bottom, the character designers, the animators. The show looks great, and it is very. If people watch Castlevania, that's another show that's been a big hit for Powerhouse and Netflix. It's that is obviously not something you would let a 6-year-old watch.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
Oops. I got a 12-year-old. I won't let watch it.
Yeah, exactly. Especially season 3.
Is the audio working? Because it seems to be a little choppy. Are you guys hearing us okay?
We're mostly all on hardwired connections, but if you're on a Wi-Fi or a cellular signal, you might have a little bit of breakup. You coming in just fine though. I can hear you and Charlie.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. It's a tad choppy, but not bad.
Yeah.
Usually I'm the choppy one.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. It's just
max headroom.
Yeah. Well, we like to have a robot.
The tradition is that like Chuck's will lock up on him, and then we'll quick take a screenshot and make memes of it all day long. And so that's the big thing we're looking for.
So we'll jump right into it today. I'm really excited to talk about the different aspects of how you guys create these stories and how you work together. Scott and I have done a lot of collaboration on the novel side, not really the screenplay or screen creation side. So I'm really excited to talk about that. But I'm also interested in how you guys got started in working together. It's interesting when I see family members that have the same goals and dreams, and in this case, writing it's not everybody's not everybody wakes up and goes, I'm going to be a writer today. So it's interesting when two family members or brothers have that. So I want to know how that dynamic worked out and how you guys started writing together.
Well, I mean, we'll both speak to that, but the one thing I'll say about writing is that it was more out of necessity. Our family is an immigrant family. Our parents are from Greece. We grew up at the Jersey Shore. We're actually in the town they filmed Jersey Shore. We have no connections or affiliations with anyone in that show or in Hollywood in general. But we didn't know anyone in the business, and we didn't know how to break into the business. And the one discipline in Hollywood that is a true meritocracy is writing. They don't care who you are, where you went to school, who you know. And it's also the one discipline where you don't need anyone's permission to do it. You can just sit down and start writing. If you want to be a director, someone has to finance your movie. If you want to be a producer, you got to get the rights to something and have connections and know people. So kind of growing up in New Jersey, not knowing anyone, we kind of figured out that, writing is a way into the business. So that really is what kind of drove it. We wanted to just tell stories, and Vlas can speak to this, but he wanted to direct. I wanted to maybe be a producer or an executive. But then as we kind of worked our way into the business with very kind of entry level menial jobs, you kind of start to feel your way out. And then writing is kind of that desire we had to tell stories and to be able to just do it without knowing anyone is what kind of led us down that path. That's what I would say. I don't know if you agree, bro. What do you think? I don't know if you heard me.
Is he
Vlas?
frozen?
What about you, Vlas? You how did you kind of get started with your journey?
He's freezing.
He's freezing. Well, you know, too, part of it is initially
agree, and I
His connection's not very good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charles. Go take it away.
Well,
speak for your brother.
What I would say is that initially, you know, we both kind of were trying to find our way into the business. I was working as an assistant at Paramount because I thought at that time I'd maybe want to be an executive or a producer, kind of go that route. And Vlas was very much like, no, I want to write and direct. And he was writing, and I would read his scripts and give notes and give feedback. And eventually we kind of fell into this rhythm. And we said, you know, why don't we try? And then I saw what it entails being an executive or being a producer. It's a great job, but it's a terrible life. And I think, you know, we're both very family oriented. The idea of, you know, having family and kids, when you're an executive, like you have to be out every night, you're meeting every night, you're reading every night, you're reading every weekend.
Yeah.
And there isn't that kind of, there isn't that opportunity to just have family time if you want to do the job right and if you want to succeed. And also I didn't like the political nature of the job. I'm not good with that.
Yeah, that sucks.
That's just not for me. Like, yeah, and it just, you know, Hollywood is a business and it's a very competitive business. And there's elements of that job that I just didn't want to do. And then, but what I saw is that, oh, you know, kind of talking through story, giving notes to my brother, you know, on his script, that kind of worked. And he said, why don't we try and write something together? And so then what ended up happening is that, you know, initially when we started, it was literally like both of us sit at the computer, one person's on the keyboard, the other person's like right next to them. And we just talk through scenes and we would talk through, you know, the moments and write together. Vlas, you back on there? Is that working?
Sorry about that. Yeah, guys. I don't know how I sound, but it's choppy in my end. I'm sorry, technical difficulties. I don't know what's going on.
Nature of the business, man. Don't sweat it.
You sound good now, and you're not the first nor the last to have the chop.
Absolutely.
Now you sound pretty good.
So I was just telling them, Vlas,
Okay.
how we initially, you know, when I was working at Paramount, you were writing and I would read your scripts and give notes. And then we kind of decided maybe we should try and write something together. And we wrote a couple scripts. And the one thing I will tell people, everyone out there, like you will read sometimes in the trades that like, oh, it was their first script and they sold it. And to be honest, a lot of time that's just smoke.
Right.
You know, this town is very much based on perception. When we sold our first script to Universal, it was like our 6th or 7th script that we'd written together. And the manager we had at the time was like, tell people it's your first script. And we were like, no, we don't want to do that. That's not true. Like, we're not comfortable with that. But like, no, it makes you seem like you're a prodigy, that you know, like something that others don't. So like for the people listening, like, don't be discouraged. In our experience, we always tell people, if you want to be a writer, you should read 100 scripts or at least 50 scripts before you try and write one. And then know that you're going to probably have to write a couple and it's going to take time. You're going to, you know, like if you look at like Oliver Stone, James Cameron, the Wachowskis, like they all say the same story. They wrote a couple scripts, you know, the first few ones weren't that good. And around script 5, 6, 7, you start to get your legs underneath you. And you get to a point where what you write is good enough that someone will be interested in. And if it's the right idea, you can hopefully, God willing, sell it. So, you know, it is a process and you just have to build those writing muscles up and it just takes time. So we wrote a few scripts together but the feedback was like, this is too small or this isn't the right idea or it's not good enough until eventually we got to the point where we had the right idea and the execution and it all kind of came together.
So what type of now? So when you read scripts, are there different types of scripts to read? Because like you go to the Barnes and Noble, you buy this big script book. I think is that different than what you would present to? Because I understand there's like different types. Like you have production scripts and or
you know whatever draft you can get your hand on. There's always any script. You know, writing is rewriting, and so like people just have to accept that is the process. And it's always interesting, I think, if you can get like they said there's different drafts. There's the spec draft, the draft that's sold. Then there's the rewrite draft. There's the draft that got the director. There's the production draft where you put in a couple speeches for the, you know, the main actors characters because you need to make their part juicier. You know, but whatever draft you can get your hands on, you know, like when we were coming up, there used to be this magazine called Scenario, and they would just print up drafts of scripts. They would get the rights from the studio and they would print it up.
Cool.
Now with, like, you know, message boards and Facebook, like there's a writers group I'm a part of. Anytime a script sells, someone will track down the script and put it up there. If you live near LA, you can go to the WGA library at Fairfax and Third, and they have bound copies of, you know, thousands of scripts. And you can go in and you can read early drafts of Star Wars. You can read drafts of Empire Strikes Back where, you know, Han doesn't, you know, get frozen in carbonite. You know, they have different drafts there, and it's just kind of amazing to read. Or
That's cool.
I remember reading the Braveheart script there, and there's so many scenes that aren't in the movie. But it helps you kind of connect the dots. And, you know, we always talk about in writing, and J.J. Abrams always talks about this, like, because people are so literate now in storytelling. Before, if you watch like a cop show from like the 1960s, you have to go from A to B to C to D, and you have to walk them through every step. But now you
Right.
get something from A to C, and like the audience understands. They connect.
They get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to show them every little step of the way. So you know, whether you track it down online, whether you go to the guild library, but the actual scripts, the only drafts you shouldn't read is sometimes you'll find like people transcribe, you know, like what the movie was. Like you want to read the exposition, you want to read the whole thing, and then that's just how you learn. And you know, a very famous writer, Eric Roth, said, he goes, you need your taste to catch up with your ability. So like you will know when you read something that's good, and the first few things you write aren't going to be that. But hopefully you can discern that, and you know that you got to just keep chiseling away and keep trying to get better.
Wow, I have so many questions.
Well, one of the things I think is interesting, as just an aside, is when as novel writers, the draft, when we go through our process, you do your first draft and you fix it, and then you send it to edits, and you come back and you get proofing, and it goes out. What's interesting to me, and when you just said what you said, and then also what you said in the pre-show, selling a spec script is almost like selling a first draft, even though you're not sending in your first draft, because there's so many different things that go through.
There's going to be changes.
There's going to be tons of changes, and that's interesting to me, because as a novelist, you sit down and you want the most perfect thing that you have, and that's the story. But you mentioned, you know, you send in your script, and then they take scenes out, or they change that Han Solo gets frozen in car. Like the story changes after the story's even been bought. So that's interesting to me about screenwriting.
Yeah, it sounds
funny
like it's actually collaborative, even if you're not collaborating with another writer, because there's so many other fingers in the pie.
By default. And like the couple things I'll say to that, you know, that are just, people just have to understand this is how it works. You know, Orsi and Kurtzman, they had a very famous article that went around writers, and they talked about how you could take the same spec, and if it sold to 3 different directors, you would end up with 3 different completely movies, 3 completely different
believe
movies.
that.
Because and what people like, you know, I always, you know, find it interesting. Like I tell people, and this is generalizing in a big way, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but this is all about collaboration, especially on the film side, is that if you don't like a movie, you should blame the director. If you don't like a TV show, blame the writer. Because in features, basically once you sell it, if you don't do the changes or address the notes that the studio gives or a director gives, you get fired and they hire someone else. And
Right.
And so part of it is like, you create your intent, you try and execute that as well as you can, and you're going to do 10 drafts before you know, sell it. And then you get the first round of studio notes or the first round of director notes, and the script's going to evolve, and there might be some story element or something that they see that they really want to lean into more, and you're going to work towards that. The biggest thing with notes, the answer is kind of twofold to notes. One, there are no bad notes. Like the people in our business are smart people. It's just hard to make a good movie. We haven't met anyone that we're like, oh, this person's a moron. Like that has not been our experience.
Right.
Now, there are people that have different kinds of intelligences, and there's different intelligence when it comes to story. But what your job is that when you get a note, is to one discern, is this a subjective note or is this objectively true?
Mhm.
Because like, whenever before we hand in a script, we'll have like 3 or 4 writer friends of ours read it. And if one person says something, that could just be their subjective opinion. Some people, like coffee, some people like tea. Like it's just, a matter of opinion. But if all 4 people say the same thing, then, oh, no, we have to listen because they're all touching on this same point. That's no longer subjective. That's an objective note.
So I know Chuck's got a lot of things, but I want to touch on a couple of terms, terminology. So you say note, that's basically feedback from the studio or from whoever. And then a spec is a project that you're putting forward. Is that written or unwritten before it goes, or a couple of basic terms? Because our viewers might not have as much experience with those terms.
No, I sorry about that, Scott. Yeah.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
A spec script is called, it's a speculative script. No one has paid you to do it. So you can get what's called an OWA, which is an open writing assignment. That is a property that the studio already owns. So they might have the rights to Harry Potter. And then they hear what'll happen is they'll reach out to all the agencies and say, hey, we have this new Harry Potter book, this book about wizards, about a young wizard. Who do you guys think might be right for it? They'll send over lists of names. The studio will look at it and they'll say who's approved. And then basically this is how writers audition, is that, okay, you've been approved to pitch your take on adapting Harry Potter.
Oh, cool.
So then 10
awesome.
or 12 writers will go in and you'll say, this is how we would adapt it. So you open up and we're at Hogwarts and we meet this precocious kid and you walk them through what your adaptation would be. And then of all those takes that they hear, they pick one person they hire, and then that person gets to go write it. A spec script is almost the antithesis of that. It's basically like you haven't been paid to write it, but you just believe in it. You sit down, you write the script. It's speculative whether you'll sell it or not. That's why they call it a spec.
Okay.
And you hope that when you get it to someone that matters, they'll be able to then help you sell it.
Very cool.
That's fascinating. Sorry to derail you, but I just wanted to drill into that just a tiny bit. So excellent.
And Vlas, it looks like we got your connection issue fixed.
I hope so. Yeah, I'm on my my Mac, so I'm hoping that'll.
Yeah, that is already 100% better, man.
You're solid now.
I couldn't hear you guys. I was just like, Anyway,
that's when you just guess and just start talking.
That's when you're like, is this
this is
a weird practical joke they're pulling on me, and they're really just like nobody talking. No, well, you sound great, so we're ready. We've been waiting for you.
You guys look great.
We're talking.
There's that.
We're talking about notes, bro, and studio notes, and what I was about to say is that the thing that you have to do as a writer is understand the note behind the note. So they will tell you, oh, hey, I don't understand why this character is doing this. And one of the worst things you can do as a writer is take their solve. They will correctly identify things that are bumping and may not be working. But the reason they pay you for these rewrite steps is because it's your job then to take what they're telling you and figure out how to fix it. Because sometimes fixing it means changing something in Act 1 or changing something in Act 2. It's like going to a doctor. Right. You say, oh, hey, my back hurts. The doctor might tell you, oh, well, you need insoles for your feet, or you got a bad knee, or you need to. But you tell them your back hurts, but you don't say, I'm thinking I should do yoga. Like, you don't give your own solution.
Right.
You're the doctor. You have to figure out why this is bumping. So one of the most important things is to take their note and figure out how to address it. And then just be open and willing and open-minded, enough where, because sometimes there'll be notes where you're like, oh, no, like, screw that. I'll never do that. And what we've learned is just to shut up and say, oh, that's interesting. And you think about it. And then maybe in like 2-3 days, you're like, you know what? Well, if we do this, we can address it this way. And in the end, like, if you want to make it work in this business, you have to be collaborative and you have to be willing to work. And if you completely disagree with a note, on the feature side, you explain why you disagree. You make a case for why you think it should be X, Y, Z. But then in the end, if you don't do it, they'll fire you. So then you have to do it.
Lauren Moore in the live chat says, it seems like good. It's talking about what you're just saying. She says, seems like good advice for handling editors, beta readers, and feedback as well. So there's some similarities there.
Yeah. You know what it is, guys, too? Like, I think we've matured as writers. And one of the ways we've matured is taking notes. I think maybe a little earlier on in our careers, we were a little more defensive. And what we have really found, and the pros and the writers that are even far more successful than us are very good at taking notes. Chris Morgan, who we worked with on a TV pilot, Chris Morgan wrote Fast and Furious franchise. You know, he's a great guy and he's a very talented writer. And what we learned from him is someone can give you a note and you can say, yes, I can do that. This is the ripple effect. This is what will happen. You don't want to, and as Charlie said, you take the note in the room. You don't want to be combative, even in the room. You don't want to be like, no, and have come off as the writing is too precious, because good writing is rewriting. So you take the note, or you can also, as Charlie said, you say, yes, I can do that, but this is what will happen. And hopefully you're working with people where it's not about ego and they'll understand that. And sometimes you aren't. And if you aren't, you are a hired gun. You have to do the best version of the note that you can do. But it is a two-part thing. It's one, taking the note and then identifying exactly what they're saying. Because as Charlie said, sometimes that's not, in sync.
Right.
I'm curious.
There's a writer we know that he one time recorded the notes meeting. And then what he did was he just took everything that the executive said and then did exactly that in the script. And then when he handed the script back in, the executive was like, this is terrible and this is stupid. And why did you do this? This doesn't work at all. And then but the mistake that he made is that, no, you told me. And he played the recording for him.
Oh, God.
He got fired that day.
Wow.
Yeah. That's not good. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Tip number one.
Again, we've never written a book. I don't know how that process is, how that editing and vetting goes. But we found whether it's TV, film, animation, the most important thing is to be able to be open and to be honest and to be able to look at your own work objectively and not be too precious.
Yeah.
And then, listen, there are gut punches that come. Everyone, you want to write something, have everyone say, oh, we love this, But there are times where you get feedback and you have to listen to it and you got to absorb that and then just roll up your sleeves and just work. One of the other things that I believe is one of the best things I've ever heard, we always say there are writers that are far more talented than us that never made it. And there are writers that are far less talented that are way more successful. But the key is just staying in the game, not giving up. And there is so much to be said. I know Woody Allen said, like, you just got to stay in the game long enough for someone to roll you the ball. Like, there is truth in that. Like, just don't let these, there's failures. You got to be very thick-skinned as a writer.
One thing I'll add, I totally, that's great advice. And the last thing is, too, just think of the way this works. They give you the note. It's your job to come back and give them something that works, or at least works as well as it can with the notes that they gave you. Because sometimes people will say this and everyone in the room's like, oh, that's great. That's great. And, as writers, guys, you sit there and you try, oh, wow, that was half baked. That really doesn't work. So you have to come back to them. They have they have a bunch of projects that they're working on. So they probably even forgot the note that they gave you.
Right.
What they want is something that works. And so when you come back to them, they may have said something that really didn't make sense. Try to give them something that works.
Yeah. That's in the end. They'll forgive late. They'll forgive, all kinds of things. What they won't forgive is if it sucks.
Yeah.
So in the end, you just have to make it work and you have to, make it as good as you can be.
I'm curious
when
on
they give notes. I don't know how this works with books, but like when you get notes, if you do 75% of them and you do them well, they'll forget about the other notes. Like, it's not like a checklist. Like, you have to do everything.
Oh, there's definitely times in the collaborations that I've done where I've gotten back, we call them developmental edits, but notes basically is the same thing. And they come back from a collaborator and you look at it and you're like, no, because I like that part. I fix the rest of it and just don't mess with the stuff.
But I Google research on
it. And then I send it back and they're like, this is amazing. And it goes to print. So
Good for you.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
So what I'm curious about is, so you guys both have worked on a couple of really big movies. You're doing the Netflix series now, and you mentioned the difference between writing a movie and then working on a television show. You have the script doesn't get changed as much in TV, but I'm worried about, or I'm not worried about.
You look worried, Josh.
I'm interested about
concerned.
The actual story collaboration that goes on between you two when you're coming up with the story. Like there's a term that we like to use, which is yes and, when we're creating the story, and somebody has an idea and you go yes and then continue on, instead of kind of a no, like one of you comes
no,
up with an idea and you're like, no, but we do a yes and it kind of builds the creation process.
It goes
on
crazy
top of that.
places.
Well,
So-
I just want to speak to it very quickly. I'm very fortunate. Charlie has great ideas, period. So I just feel blessed because he comes in and I'm like, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And then we just kind of, just try to go back and forth. I feel though, with us too, it helps just in the writing process. Sometimes he'll say something and it may not be something, or I may say something, we might not use that, but we'll use maybe a kernel of that, or that'll give him an idea. It helps too. We have always said that writing is solving problems. And if you have two brains attacking it, it's, I find it to be very helpful to have that bouncing board, to be able to go back and forth. For a writer that's in a room by himself, I think it's personally, I think it's harder. I think in television, they prefer writing teams because, again, you're getting two brains, and I can understand why. And having done this now for a while, I would always hire writing teams. But the big ideas from the ones that, the projects, they've been Charlie's, the big ideas. So I've been fortunate there. And then it's like, what's the best version of that? What do the characters want? We always just believe in, too, finding out, and it's the Sorkin thing, what does our character want? And then how that character goes about getting it defines who they are.
Right.
Right.
But
right.
you have to start with the big idea, especially nowadays, to cut through the clutter.
Yeah.
And Josh, I like what you're saying, the kind of, but we always say, like, just writing, it's like you're building brick by brick. And sometimes, like Vlas is saying, I feel it's much harder, writers that work on their own, it's a very solitary profession as it is. And if you're literally just you and the screen, like that's pretty austere. But like, but sometimes, like if Vlas and I are just talking, there's sometimes what we call like the invisible steps. Like he'll have an idea and I'll say, okay, yeah, but, and what if we do this? And then we might not even do that part, but then that gets us to this part where what we end up landing on. But if we didn't have that back and forth in that discussion, there wouldn't be those kind of invisible steps up the ladder to the idea that we end up landing on.
Right.
So, we're big believers, like, we sit and just collaborate. Like if you saw us, our office is just like two desks and we just sit there and we just basically talk all day and figure it out. And then we'll, all right, you write this scene, I write this scene. That's what we do now, just for the sake of expediency.
Right.
And then we'll kind of trade and, revise each other. But there have been other projects too, where we've worked with a third writer, and it's just great to be able to just bounce the ideas around.
Yeah.
And as long as there's no ego involved and everyone's just trying to do, and you both have to be willing to give. Like, and if there's something that he loves, even if I disagree, we keep it in. We'll see what our manager says. We'll see what the producer says.
And vice versa too, and sorry.
No, so
no, you're good.
It's just about being open, and just like the only rule is that best idea wins and the best version wins.
And we've gotten to that point now. Like we've grown too, like even on a spiritual side of like, it's not about ego. And I believe that with my brother, and and I hope he believes it with me. We are both passionate, about, times certain story points, but it's not like, what's the best idea for the story? And if we can find that, we're like, thank you. We don't care where it comes from. And
you guys feel it when you get something, when you hit something kind of you think is magical? Do you both get that look across your desk there? We're like, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. When an idea, guys, Charlie talks about it, and I totally agree with him on this. It's alive. Once you hear an idea and it's a lot, you can just almost instantaneously know, oh, that's a really good idea.
Right.
Oftentimes when we're really struggling with something, we're trying to make something work, 9 times out of 10, that doesn't ever fully really work. It's that idea that just kind of, you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that works. So those are beautiful moments. And when you have those are blessings.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay. So I would like to take a minute. Josh, do you need to do the thing?
Nope. Go for it.
Okay.
What's the
so
thing?
I'm one of the we usually have a show sponsor in the middle of the show. We talk about somebody's book and that kind of thing, but apparently we're not doing that
part
today.
where Josh takes his shirt off.
Yeah, it's
normally a very
Josh.
popular part of the show.
We have to nod to him since he's the tech guru of the group. No, actually, I'm one of those guy in a room alone by himself. I've never collaborated. I wouldn't inflict myself on anybody, but I'm very interested in the difference, the more like mechanical difference, like actually writing a script in a movie and a TV show versus like I tend to write in trilogies. So, you know, I plot out 3 books differently than I would plot out a standalone book. I'm curious what's the difference between writing a 2-hour screenplay and a 10-episode TV arc? How do you break up the tension and the pacing and all that stuff between the two?
It's a good question. It's easy with regards to that question for the screenplay, you know, and Charlie can speak to this, and I think he agrees with me on this one too. But, you know, again, look to the people that we look up to, the masters, the people that are very successful. So Alan Ball would be an example. He does this. Coppola does this. Even Scott Frank, we had heard him on a podcast, and he does this. You know the beginning of your story for a screenplay. You know the end of Act 1. You know maybe the end of Act 2, and you know your ending. You don't know anything in between. We're not the guys, at least when it comes to a screenplay, where we kind of plot out every single little thing. We know our characters inside and out, and we know what they want. And then you kind of let the story and let the characters take you there, hopefully.
So you just have a little discovery writing between those major points in the story arc.
I love doing it that way.
That's the way I work too, yeah.
Yeah, I feel it's just more organic, and there's nothing. Listen, in television, it's kind of what you're saying, where we go through every single beat and we plot out the whole thing. And that's what it's been like for the TV projects that we've sold, say to the ABC, CBS, you know, A&E. With the Netflix show, that one was a little more where we had a little more loose. It was a little more loosey goosey. Maybe Charlie, you can even talk to that one a little bit more.
Well, I think to Chuck's point, the difference too between features and TV, you know, we always say in features, it's always Chekhov's gun. You know, everything that you introduce, you have to pay off or it can't be in there. Yeah. And everything has to be resolved by the end. You can't
close all the loops.
You have to close all the loops. And to me, it's still the much harder discipline. In TV, you have, okay, even if you arc out, you know, what the season is, if it's a serialized show, each episode has to have its own little arc, its own beginning, middle, and end. Mm-hmm. And like Vlas, you know, mentioned, you know, when we write a feature, we'll know the major plot points, the end of Act 2, you know, what the character's arc is, and we'll have mapped out some stuff, but we don't have this, like when you do a TV show, when you develop a TV show and you sell it to a network, you have to do a story document, which is like this 3 to 5 page document, which is basically explains what the show is. It's like, this is the central concept, these are the characters, and this is the story of the first episode. And then once that gets approved, then you have to write basically a 15-page outline where you're literally going slug line, scene by scene, it's basically the script without dialogue. And then once that's approved, then you write the script, and basically like
you're getting judged on every step, guys. Too.
Right.
I'm just giving that to your listeners, and a very wise, very successful producer told us this. Every step of the way, you are getting judged. So like you have to make sure that every single document that you hand in is good and it keeps them excited. Sorry.
Now, do you have to do all of this for every single episode, or the overarching series?
On a working series, they outline every episode, and so the outlines too, like you follow it. But I also remember a lot of writers, you know, you can be great at writing an outline, but that doesn't mean it translates to the page. And there are times where you've outlined something, and even just this pilot we're writing for MGM right now, like, oh, we didn't need this beat. We already understand that, or you know, or we can shorten this. And then what you have to do too. This was also Bob Sertner, who's a producer. We wrote a pilot for him at CBS and one at ABC, and he's produced a ton of shows there. He said, always make sure there's a few surprises from the outline to the script, because like, you know, people are, you know, grinding through reading things and like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. Like he said, always lay in a couple surprises that so
you actually have to make it entertaining for the executives or whoever's reading it as much as you do for the finished product for the viewers.
Yes.
100%.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah.
That sounds like an interesting challenge.
Even what Charlie's saying too, and Bob had told us, you know, gave us this advice too, because when you have an outline, you can't just kind of regurgitate it. Like it has to come alive when you write it. And again,
Yeah.
something that even kind of works in the outline, if it's just not working on the page, like you almost have to, I don't want to say forget the outline, but like, again, what you're writing has to work.
Yeah.
The trap sometimes you fall into, even to Charlie said, is that, oh, but I had this in the outline, so I need to put this in the pilot. And sometimes the answer to that is no, you don't. You don't have to do that. And as Charlie said, we eliminated something.
We had a question in the live chat. I've lost it in the scroll here, but
you talking about the budget?
yeah, and it's something I brought up off camera earlier. There it is. How cognizant are you guys of what it's going to cost to make this thing as you're writing the spec or the whatever?
Well, the one thing I will say is that when you're first starting out and you're just trying to, break into the business and sell your first script, don't think about budget at all. Just write a great script. And there are times, now because, we've been in the Writers Guild for 14 years now. We've worked with line producers. We kind of know how this works. We can be cognizant, like there's a script we're trying to put together now where we were cognizant of, okay, yeah, if we keep this more contained, this will keep the budget under 30 million. But until you've kind of, gone through scripts with line producers and know how it's broken down, don't even worry about that, in my opinion, unless you're trying to write an, kind of a Jason Blumhouse, like thriller that is in one location. Otherwise, don't even think about it. Let your imagination run free. And part of it is like, we can talk a little bit about what the studios are looking for, what they want, and they don't care because they'll bring in other people. Trust me, like every script gets rewritten in Hollywood. Like they will bring other people to bring the budget down if they need to, but just let your imagination run wild. Like don't worry about budget at all.
You know what it is, guys, too, and like just as writers, this is why it's great to have this conversation because you guys can relate. You don't want to censor yourself. I think when you're a writer and you're censoring yourself, you're in your head a little bit. You're not writing from your gut. And that's the place you don't want to be. That said, though, I understand the challenge of, it's kind of what Tarantino did with Reservoir Dogs. He said, you know what? I want to keep it contained. I want to try to keep it in one location, the warehouse, or a couple other locations. So as Charlie mentioned, if you're taking on that approach, the Blumhouse approach, there's something to be said about that. But, if you're writing a action adventure, try not to think about the budget. Just try to write the best version of that. So I guess in the end, it's just try not to censor yourself. And if you have to write something that, has certain budget limitations and it has to be contained, just give yourself, okay, this is kind of what I was thinking. Here's the idea. And then try not to think about it too much,
Right. So writing on what you both said earlier, before in the pre-show, we talked about, you guys were given a budget you had to cut in half. So maybe that would be another way to get into this. So now you've written freely, you haven't self-edited yourself, but now you're being told, we love what you did, but now just cut that budget in half. So what is that like?
Yeah. What are the things that drive up a production cost in a script?
Well, so listen, there's a couple things. And before we even dive into that, the one thing I will say is that if you're working in a very specific genre, talk to people that work in that genre first, because like this is both about Immortals and then for Gods and Heroes. Like everyone in town, they just want an interesting story. They just want something that works. So they will tell you, just write whatever you want. And then what happens is that once then you have something that everyone wants, then you have to then make it work for the budget. And that's when all the revising.
That's like 160 million. We can't make this.
Are you crazy? What were you doing?
Exactly. It was that. These guys are bonkers. Like,
cut them down to 20.
That's elements, but it's also what made it. There was a bidding war for that script. I don't know if Charlie had mentioned it. And but it is, as Charlie said, like, write whatever you want. It's okay. Whatever your vision is. And then when that comes in, they're like, what? What are you, crazy? You can't. But it was an interesting process. And I don't want to cut Charlie off with regards to how we cut the budget. So sorry, bro.
No. And to answer your question, Chuck, labor is always the biggest cost in physical production with live action. Physical labor.
Like all the behind the camera stuff.
Yeah, just crew, people, days of filming, and like, if you have a big action sequence, that takes a lot of days to film that. And so the more days, the more the movie will cost. But and in terms of Gods and Heroes, like the executives at Netflix were like, no, like the script can be 27 pages, 28. Don't worry, just write your vision. And then once the director came on board, he's like, no, it has to be 21 pages and only 7 pages of action. That's all we can afford to. And we're like, what? But they told us it doesn't matter. Like, we're making this now. And so we spent 2 months just cutting pages and pages. And it was the worst. But on Immortals, basically, they told us that there was 150, 160 million. It was the line producer from 300. And the studio said, if you can get it to 75 million, we'll make it. But otherwise, we can't. And so then basically what we did was we sat down with Tarzan and we would go to his house and we just tried to beat out the story of like what was essential, what were the moments of magic that we didn't want to lose, and was there a version of this that we could make that could adhere to the parameters that they were now giving us. And like some of it's like simple stuff like, all right, well, if they're on top of the deck of this boat, if we have that scene under the deck and we have other scenes there already, that's one less set and that's one less kind of location move and one less stage. And like there's little things like that. And then there's other things like, can we lose this sequence? Can we, like, the first version of Immortals was very much more like Lord of the Rings, but all the kind of magical stuff got stripped out and lots of the story got stripped out and some of the backstory all got stripped out. And so it was a process. Like in the end, we still think the film works. We're still proud of the film. We know like a couple places where like we wish we could have went left instead of right, but in the end, we're still very proud of it. And understanding now, listen, in the end, it's kind of what we were talking about. In the end, all they want is for it to work. So no one, you know, when they watch the movie, they don't know that, oh, well, they were told to lose half the movie and still find a way to, they don't care. Your job is to sit down, watch the movie and enjoy.
Yeah, that was abrupt. How'd they get below decks again? That's weird.
It was easier with Immortals though too. Tarzan had a very specific vision for it. So as Charlie said, we went in. He had a brilliant way. It was his idea how to get into the world of Greek mythology. And our dream at that time was like, oh, Lord of the Rings in the world of Greek mythology. That was too expensive to Tarzan's.
Wow, I would have loved to have seen that.
So he had always said, I want this to be fantastic, not fantastical. So all these kind of Greek mythological creatures and monsters were stripped out of it. And he went to little more violent kind of plays. In terms of the arc, we had an arc where our main character was a believer and a non-believer. That got lost in the rewrite, that we weren't involved with. But as Charlie said, there's other things in there that we absolutely love. I mentioned the character bit because we were talking about character before, and I know you guys talk about character, and it is about the character evolving. So with Gods and Heroes, we really try to bring back that idea of like, wouldn't it be cool to have like a Lord of the Rings type show in the world of Greek mythology? Yeah. And we brought that to it. And because it's an animation and it's in TV, we've been involved on the creative part of things the whole way through. So that's been just very kind of gratifying. But even as Charlie said, there are limitations in animation, which we didn't know. I thought it'd be like, okay, from what stories we've heard from Pixar, like, oh, that we can kind of just watch it and then, we can rewrite it and we can show it to people. No, it's like you lock the scripts and that's it, guys. So what you write, actually, there's more pressure to get it right because you can't change as much. There is a moment in the process where you can change it. Charlie can talk about that too. The thumbnails where you get to see and you're like, okay, maybe we can change it a little bit here and there, but they can't be huge changes. So that's been an interesting learning experience.
Yeah, you can't really do reshoots with animation, right?
Yeah, not really.
It depends. It all depends on your budget though, too.
Oh,
yeah.
At Pixar, they make the movie 3 times, before. And that's why I've always believed the quality is so high. Because they literally make 3 versions of it before and so you're massaging and Kevin Feige always says like plussing it. So like you take what's there and you just plus it. You make this scene a little bit better. Oh, and you know what I was watching an episode of Gods and Heroes the other day. And I'm like, oh, we should have done this. Like, oh, that would have been an even better version of this. And if we were at Pixar, we would have been able to change that. But and Netflix has been great. I'm not complaining in any way.
Sure.
But like it is a process and it evolves. And even with Immortals, like Vlas said, that we had always said, even though this is a story that takes place in pagan times, it was always supposed to be a story about an atheist who becomes a martyr. And it was funny because I'll never forget, right before we started filming, we went up to Montreal to go to set to see Tarzan, and they had brought in another writer to do a rewrite on the script. And we said, like, Tarzan, like that arc, it's all been gutted. And he had said, Henry's been saying the same thing to me. Henry's been saying it. And he goes, and if he was Brad Pitt, we could change it. But the studio is saying, no, like, we want to lock the script. This is it. We're done. And so part of it is there's, again, like what we've really come to understand the longer we've done this is that you're always, the thing is, it's not just this is it and then you're done. It's always evolving. You're always trying to make every little bit better. We can make this moment better. We can make this character richer. Oh, we can have this moment here, you know, so it's constantly evolving. When I remember the first time I heard Spielberg say this, and this was like in right out of college, I didn't understand. He said, movies aren't finished, they're abandoned. And I didn't understand that. I'm like, what is he talking about? Like, and he talked about how after he finished Raiders, which is like, to me, like a perfect movie, you can't make a better movie. He didn't know whether people would like it or not. And so he went to Hawaii the weekend it came out. And he said, the audience will tell us what we have. And like, part of me is like, you just made Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, you know, but I understand that now because you lose perspective. You just keep trying to make everything as good as it can be. And then in the end, the audience will tell you what
That's
it is.
like Coppola. Coppola, at the end of The Godfather, he goes, it was completely quiet. He goes, oh my God, they hate it. This is a disaster.
They were just in awe.
Exactly. That's The Godfather. He's like, oh God, it's horrible. I screwed up.
Well,
I mean, but I think that's true
the,
for everybody, though. You do the best thing you can. You make the best art you can, the best performance you can, whatever. And then it's out of your hands. It's really up to the mob at that point.
The story, and you mentioned earlier that Gods and Heroes was kind of like maybe not quite a do-over of Immortals, but it allows you to do kind of what you want thematically and with your story. So when you guys set out to create this, and even maybe before you even sold it, what was the story that you guys wanted to tell with this Gods and Heroes?
You know, Josh, it's interesting you say that. We have to figure out how we're going to like pitch this to people because I'm trying to figure out how we can talk about it without spoiling it.
Sure.
It's kind of like trying to like, the one thing that I will say, and this is maybe a good thing for writers, because it's always about like, you know, there's always like a seed. And for me, the seed for this was always, what we thought was interesting is that the story of Hercules, everyone, maybe people know, maybe they don't know, but we always loved the story about Hercules' birth. And basically like Zeus had fallen in love. He had spotted Hercules' mother, who was a queen. And he was immediately smitten by her. And so he disguised himself as the queen's husband, the king. He disguised himself as the king and, you know, bed her and eventually impregnated her. And then she ended up having twins, one which was Zeus's son and the other which was the king's son. And we always thought it was interesting that like the one boy was Hercules and then the other boy was like this weakling. And we're like, well, what's this guy's story like from his point of view? So without kind of like getting into, because I don't know how to pitch it yet without spoiling it, that kind of just that seed of like, well, what's this guy's story?
Right.
What was his life like? Kind of was the seed that eventually led to this. And it's something that I would encourage writers. Like one of the things we did, there's a script we sold, a revenge story, but we kind of used something that's in The Godfather, that's in the book, that's not in the movie. Like in The Godfather, after Michael kills the police captain and he goes to Sicily, the way the Godfather is able to bring him back in the book is that the Godfather pays someone else to admit to killing the police captain. And once that is resolved, then Michael can come back. And so the idea of, you know, like admitting to a crime someone else did to you know, that was the inspiration for what we did for this script called Hell to Pay, where, you know, this kid's father is in debt with the mob. They're threatening to kill him and take their business. And he's like, how can I make this right? And he agrees to, you know, admit he did a crime he didn't to get the mobster's nephew off the hook. But then they double cross him. So for writers, just look for something that you think is interesting, a kernel that you think like, well, what happens here? Like, you know, or where does the story go from here? Or how do we see it from this person's point of view? I think is always a good way to just kind of get into a story and a world and just get your brain churning.
Right. I think you tipped the hat already when you told them the
Hercules. Oh, did I?
So what do you guys think the biggest hurdle would be jumping from novel to screenplay? Because I think most of us probably have a book or a series of books that we think would make a great TV show or whatever. But I mean, like, just, you know, with a novel, you got a lot more internal dialogue. You know, you really get into the character's head a lot more. I think with screenplays, you probably rely a lot more on dialogue, and you're writing it to be performed. So I see an obvious difference there, but just what do you guys think the biggest hurdle is?
I think the biggest hurdle is exactly kind of what you're saying, where you take a novel and something, if it's like an inner voice that you're hearing, how do you basically express that and get those ideas across from a visual standpoint?
Right.
Because movies are visually, you know, they're in the theater and you're kind of, so that's the challenge. What you don't want to do too is to have a situation where you're trying to communicate a story and there's, again, you don't want it to be like where the dialogue is, you know. I think Sorkin, even if you just kind of, there's all these clips that he has and he talks about dialogue, and you kind of don't want to express everything in the dialogue. So it's how you set up the scene. And that takes time to really think about, you know, oh, well, here's this idea that was expressed via an internal monologue. How can I get that? How can I express that idea visually is, I would think, the biggest challenge. One of the things that, just to revert back to you guys said, when you hear an idea and you know it's alive, when Charlie came with the Hercules idea, I'm like, okay, that's brilliant. We're going to use
I'm already, when he was describing, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, I think that's
great.
awesome.
It was like one of those, like, oh, okay, here. There was no like, well, I don't know if that's going to work.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of okay.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. And the only one thing, and I want to go back to the novel, but going back to, like, you asked about, like, the, you know, gods and heroes, part of it is like just going back to seeing something that moves you emotionally. Like, we remember how we felt when we saw Lord of the Rings, how we felt when we saw the animated version of that, how we felt when we saw Star Wars. And we were like, oh, if we can just capture that, just how, you know, how that made you feel. And if we get some of that across in this animated piece, in this animated story, it is a hero's journey. It is fantastical. It is about believing in yourself. It is about many things, you know, how hubris can, you know, be detrimental, and just seeing someone evolve and seeing that, just that kind of bringing you back to that moment in time where you just kind of, you know, saw that movie magic. And that's what Spielberg's so good at doing. But I think the biggest and most challenging thing with regards to taking a novel, making it a movie, is to figure out how you get certain ideas across visually. What would you say, bro?
I think it's structure. I think the biggest thing is structure. And like, and again, like, you know, what's true in this business is there are no rules, but structure, like, whenever we've done rewrites, or, you know, you look at a script and you read it for a friend, when something's not working, it's almost always structural. Now, when I mean structural, that can be the character structural arc. But like, there's a great video clip I recommend if you guys haven't seen it, where and for all your viewers to watch it, the Michael Arndt one. I don't know if it's posted like in a public forum, but if you've ever seen Michael Arndt, the writer of Little Miss Sunshine, break down Star Wars and what's the toy movie? Toy Story.
Toy Story.
He has this where he breaks it down. And he literally works you through the structure, because he goes, you can't have a great ending unless you have the proper structure. So like, you have to have your first act. And I know this sounds like very kind of like writing 101, but like your inciting incident and how that's tied to the personal, and then how that leads to the end of act one. And that basically is the journey your character's now going to have to go on. For me, that's the biggest thing. In a, you know, books, you can play with structure, time, the story can unfold. In a movie, you have to hit certain benchmarks. And even when you look at movies, you would never think that. You sit down and you look at it, oh my God, well, yeah, that's really the end of act one. Oh, and here's the midpoint of act two, and this is the low point. This is the end of act two. They hit all of those. So for me, that's the biggest challenge, where you do become a slave to structure to some degree in a feature. And I think that's the toughest challenge.
I agree with that. It is like, it all about structure, guys. And just, let's just take a moment now. and look at a film that is like somewhat similar to a novel. You look at Pulp Fiction. You know, it's kind of told in a way.
Yeah, it bounces around a lot. Yeah.
But look at Jules' emotional arc. Pretty straightforward. He's pretty straightforward. From the beginning, he's this kind of cold-blooded kind of killer. And then by the end, that emotional journey is very linear. And, you know, by the end, he becomes someone who's going to give up that life.
Right.
You know, if it wasn't for the experience that he had, he would have killed, you know, the Roth character in the diner there.
Right.
So even though I think Charlie's 100% right, structure is huge. And if you don't have that right, guys, too, if you're adapting your novel, if that's not right, then right away you're going to get rewritten. And right away, too, from the executive standpoint, you're going to be kind of like, oh, this person is just like an amateur. They don't get it. So you have to get the structure right. And then in addition to that, I would say if you can also get the main character's emotional arc right, you know, that's another thing that you have to kind of figure out. Because in a novel, you get to kind of play with that. It doesn't really have to adhere to like a middle, beginning, and end as much as it does in a 2-hour movie.
And would that hold true for TV shows too? Like every episode has to have a specific structure as well as the overarching series structure.
Definitely for the pilot. For the pilot, you definitely have to have I would say a character go on a journey so that they feel like it's very satisfying. Pilots are challenging because you need to have that, and you also need to launch the series.
Right.
What were you
Nancy Miller, who's a writer that we've worked with, that we collaborated on a project. She created Saving Grace, and she's created like 5 shows. She always believes the first act of a pilot is what makes or breaks it. And she goes, if you don't set up your character and the dilemma within the first 15 pages, and now, like, because now as network TV kind of falls by the wayside. Right. You know, the teaser and act 1, like for a while you would combine your teaser and act 1. So the first 20 pages of your pilot, that's what she believed would make or break the pilot. And then that's the setup. And then wherever that story resolves, what's kind of interesting in TV is that you want to have a resolution to the story you've set up, but then you also need some kind of tease at the end to show how the story continues and why you have to tune in again next week.
Right. So what's average script length on a TV show episode? How many pages?
For 1 hour, 50 to 60 pages.
50 to 60. And a script would like a feature would just be like double that, roughly.
100 to 120. If you're a young writer, like, now listen, if anyone asked you, this was Scott Frank,
I was just thinking this.
He said, if the first question they ask you is how long your script is, he goes, that person can't help you. Because that doesn't mean anything. That's completely arbitrary. It's like, is this working or is it not working? Now, normally, if someone gives me a 150-page script and they're a new writer, right away you're like, oh, this is going to maybe not be good because it shouldn't be. Now, but you have to read it. You have to read it because you might read it. And you might be like, this is great. I'll never forget. I read Against All Enemies, one of the best scripts I ever read. It was 180 pages, and I'm like, what is this? And I flew through it. Now that's Jamie Vanderbilt. He wrote Zodiac. He's an amazing writer. It's not something that I'm not recommending people write 180-page scripts.
I like when Sorkin talked about writing. I think it was either Jobs or The Social Network, and it was like 220 pages or some crazy number. And
that's what Scott Frank said. Yeah,
they had to sit down and time it to make sure that it. Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, and that's the point Scott Frank had made. He's like, social network. Are you kidding me? Like, it was brilliant. What you cut, and so that's what I love that you mentioned that, bro.
Yeah, Chuck, you've been mentioning Sorkin the whole time, and I went through probably a whole month and a half where when I was really wanting to write screenplays, I watched everything that Sorkin did. I binged The West Wing. I watched all of his YouTube things, and I was like, God, his dialogue is ridiculous. So yeah,
he's good. He's good.
So Gods and Heroes, it premieres November this year. What is one thing that you are excited or want people to take away from this when it comes out? What's the thing that you're most proud of about this series?
You go first.
I just, to be honest, I couldn't be prouder. We only have 4 episodes done, but it's so nice that finally, like, what we wrote is what is up there. And the journey of there's 4 characters that are, really, it's about Heron, the main guy, Seraphim, the villain, Zeus, and Hera. their journey, I love it. I couldn't be more proud of all 4 of their stories.
I agree.
So I can't wait for people to see it.
It for us, it definitely harks back to, what we were talking about before. It just kind of moves you emotionally, and it brings you on this journey, and you hope that, Scorsese says this. He makes the film, but he makes it for himself, because if it moves him emotionally, then he hopes it'll move other people emotionally, and that's all we can all do. I think as artists, we ask ourselves, when we read whatever we've written, or when we see whatever, God willing, has gotten produced, does it move us emotionally? Does it take us on that journey? I agree with Charlie. I feel that this one does, and so it's very exciting for us to share that with people. So hopefully they'll be brought to a place where they'll laugh, they'll cry, and by the end of it, they'll also get a sense of hope and really kind of feel good about it. And I think there's that component of it too, and at least that's what we're hoping.
I can't wait for November. I'm like, let's just fast forward right now. Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited for it to come out. I think it's gonna. I love Demorals. I thought it was a beautiful movie. I like the Greek history and the mythology that goes on with the depth of the characters, and kind of even the stories that were created to explain things that they couldn't explain. Like I like seeing that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to see it come out. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. It's been an awesome conversation.
It's been great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
The one last thing I'll say, I'll never forget this. And it was actually Eric Roth who said it. He goes, "This is how you know if you're a writer. If you write 40 pages of your script," he's talking about features, "and you read it and you realize it's not working, and you can throw it in the garbage and start over, then you're a writer."
Yep.
And I always thought that was very true, and people have to remember that, and just know that it's a process. It's a process. You're not going to spit out gold, but you just keep polishing and keep working.
And what I would say to your listeners, for people that are starting out, and because there's always a lot of adversity and there's a lot of rejection, and the advice that we were given, and I think it's a good one, or a good piece of advice, Ben Gordon had given. He wrote Murder in the First and Wyatt Earp, and he had a very successful career. He said, basically that if you feel as a writer, you have to ask yourself, am I a writer? Do I want to do this or not? If you feel that writing for you is the oxygen that you breathe, without it, you can't live, then you do it. Yep. And you don't let anyone deter you. Don't let anyone say you can't. You'll find a way. You'll work hard. You have to be tenacious. There's no doubt you'll be okay. But if it's not the oxygen, then you know what? There's other things that you can do.
Yeah. Right.
Well, my wife won't give me the option. She says if I go a couple of days without writing, that I turn into somebody she doesn't like. So if I start getting grumpy, it's like, go to your keyboard now.
Yeah, I get the same talk. Yeah.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
Well, Charley, Vlas, again, thank you guys so much for coming on. It was a blast to hang out and talk with you. I have no idea what Lauren and Kayleen are up to on Thursday, guys. Everybody that was with us in the live chat, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. If you had not subscribed to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, click the bell if you're listening to us on the feed. Monday mornings, 10 a.m. U.S. Central Time, we're live. If you're not getting in the live chat, that's where all the shenanigans happen. And you need to check that out, because Oxygen of Valor. Yes, Bard. And thank you guys so much for coming on the show. Everybody else, come back next time. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium.
Later, guys.
Thanks for having us, guys. Take care. Be safe.
Awesome. Thanks.